Brexit means Brexit, and we're going to make a success of it.
It was a national vote, it was a national referendum, and Parliament has to respect that.
We're leaving on the 31st of October, no ifs or buts.
The time when people trust politicians, that's over.
Can you give us a question?
I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you stay categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir.
There is an awakening going on. Activism works.
I will do whatever it takes to stop Brexit.
Hello and welcome to Politics at the Edge from the University of East Anglia. I'm Claire Precy and with me Alan Finlayson, and it almost makes me chuckle when I listen to that because it reminds me how difficult it is for politicians to keep their promises.
Yeah, remind me of the date. Is it October 31st yet? Are we in the EU?
No, we haven't left. It's the middle of November.
Okay, so this is that nightmare from which I'm trying to awake. It will never end.
It will never end. It goes
here
on
I am
and
in
on
the studio
and
with you, talking Brexit.
Again. I know. Please get me a cup of coffee. Okay, so I'm really pleased today. We've got some experts to try and help us understand what has happening and what has been happening and what might happen in the future. Professor Hussein Kassim is here again. Welcome.
Hi.
And Nikos Skoutaris, who's an associate professor in European Union law.
Hi.
And I want to start with Boris Johnson and how we got to this point. So Boris Johnson's been out on the campaign trail, and this is what he had to say to his supporters last week.
We have a parliament that is paralysed, blocked, and the result is that the whole Brexit delay is holding us all back. It's like a bendy bus jackknifed on a yellow box junction. Nobody can get round it. It's blocking the traffic in every direction. And the uncertainty and the delay are bad for the country.
So there, Boris Johnson in full stand-up comic mode, which is what he does best.
Yes, that's actually very typical of Boris Johnson. He always gives these very over-elaborated, overextended metaphors which get a laugh, but then by the end of them you've forgotten what it actually was that he was talking about.
So he says Parliament is blocked, Hussein, because MPs wouldn't vote to approve his withdrawal agreement. Is he right? Is that how it is?
Well, factually, that's not quite correct, is it? Because there were two motions that day, and the motion to pass the second reading for the withdrawal Act bill actually did pass, and it passed by quite a good majority. So that's not quite true. So the problem that he had, therefore, was that it would be opened up to amendment and very close parliamentary scrutiny, and it's that I think that was his concern.
Mm-hmm. And Nikos, where do you feel we are with all of this?
I mean, if we go back to the motto of the Leave campaign is take back control, and during those 3 years, a major question that was asked is who will take back control? Is it the Parliament or the government? Is it the constituent nations, Scotland or Northern Ireland, or is it London? And in a way, I mean, of course, the Parliament has put some limits to the executive, but at the same time, that was always their job. Their job is to actually scrutinize the government, and at the end of the day, the Parliament is also reflective of the divisions of the nation.
So we probably should try and understand this withdrawal agreement a bit because it is confusing. Can somebody tell me what's the difference? What are the fundamental differences between Theresa May's withdrawal of agreement and Boris Johnson's withdrawal agreement?
Well, I'll have a first go, but I'm sure Nikos will come in and correct me. But the key difference is with respect to the backstop. Under Theresa May's deal, this was an unless and until kind of arrangement, so it would only come into action if an agreement couldn't be reached that enabled the Irish border to remain open. What Boris Johnson has been able to renegotiate, and actually I think it's to his credit because nobody thought that this would be possible, he was able to open up negotiations over the withdrawal agreement. He was able to negotiate a quite different arrangement, which is effectively a permanent arrangement, which keeps that border open. It's a case of sort of Schrödinger's cat in some ways because Northern Ireland remains part of two territories. It remains in the customs union of the EU plus alignment with single market regulations, but also remains part of a UK customs union.
The whole idea of the EU as an entity where there is free movement of goods is based on two separate issues. On the one hand, we have what we call a customs union, which is this idea that when you trade between the different member states, there are no tariffs, and at the same time, there is one tariff when we trade with the rest of the world. And on the other hand, the idea of single market, which is that apart from the fact that there is free movement of goods, people, services, and capital, it's also that when it comes to goods, we all follow pretty much the same rules. So that's why we don't have any kind of controls within the single market. The moment that the UK has decided to be outside the customs union and the single market meant that there will be controls on all its borders when it comes to goods. So, but at the same time, the UK said, okay, we're not going to have any kind of controls on the Irish border. We will have a frictionless border. That's only possible if the UK decides to do one of two things. Either Northern Ireland has to be close to the EU, or the whole UK has to be close to the EU. The initial proposal of the Commission was just Northern Ireland to be within the EU. Theresa May said that no Prime Minister would accept that. Then we had the Theresa May agreement, which said the whole UK would be close to the EU, and that's something that actually the ardent supporters of Brexit said that this is absolutely unacceptable. And we ended up with Boris Johnson deal, which is actually the initial Commission proposal, but dressed up in a way that it's way better and way more acceptable to supporters of Brexit.
Isn't there something else important that's different to do with the nature and timing of negotiations for a third-party trade agreement, right? The part of what the most enthusiastic Brexiteers didn't like about the Theresa May deal was that, as they understood it, it was going to make it very difficult for Britain to reach the kind of trade agreement they wanted to reach because it wouldn't be doable until the EU agreed to it, and they saw that as giving them all the power. Is it not the case that the way this withdrawal agreement works would actually lead us to a point where the UK could say, OK, we're done now, we don't want to have any more negotiations, but you won't give us what we want, we're going to leave? Doesn't it give those kind of more enthusiastic Brexiters more of an opportunity to realise later down the line what they most want, which is an absolute withdrawal from free trade with the EU?
This is a really important point. The reason that I think we started off our answers with talking about the backstop is that's what has been in the forefront of political debate and in the public's mind, and certainly the press coverage. Actually, this is a really very important difference, and what Theresa May's deal essentially did was to keep the UK aligned with the regulations, with regulations in the single market, and this meant that this was sort of behind the aspiration to be to have frictionless trade, so to have the closest possible relationship. And you're quite right to say that what Brexiteers didn't like about this is it would stop the UK from being agile, from undertaking these buccaneering trade deals with third countries. And what changed under Boris Johnson's deal, under the revised deal, was that all of those commitments were shifted to the political declaration to the extent that they survived.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, the Boris Johnson deal gives this opportunity in the future for the UK to have a much more distant relationship with the EU. But it's important to point out that when the Commission initially proposed that was totally rejected. And in fact, we have people like Jacob Rees-Mogg that said that unless the DUP is on board, we will never accept that. The DUP never came to board, but still they accepted that. In fact, we had Adria Jenkins, an MP that has been an ardent Brexiteer and a passionate unionist, who said that actually, you know what, my constituency is far from Northern Ireland, and that's why now I'm accepting Boris Johnson deal. So, you are absolutely right, but at the same time, one of the main arguments against Theresa May's deal was that it was actually putting a border down the Irish Sea. There were people that were saying that it makes Northern Ireland a protectorate. And in fact, Boris Johnson deal, from this perspective, should have been rejected way more than Theresa May's deal.
It does that even more so, we mean.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes,
but is there a sense in which this, because I think lots of people, firstly, I think, don't quite get that when Brexit is done, actually Brexit's not done. There's a whole new period of endless discussions and negotiations. But doesn't this mean that actually, in a way, the most difficult issue, which is how Britain is going to trade with whoever it's going to trade with, has really just been kicked down the road? The can's been kicked down the road so that they can get this withdrawal agreement passed, and then we're going to have an almighty fight in some months' time, assuming there's a Conservative government that passes that withdrawal agreement, about what our trade negotiations are going to be. And that's going to be quite a hard and bitter fight, isn't it?
Yes, I think that the problem is there are multiple pathways, and people keep on promising or asking for a clean Brexit, but whichever way you go, you don't end up with a sort of a straightforward overnight resolution of this. Even no deal doesn't accomplish or achieve that. No deal means that you come back at some point to negotiate with the EU under procedures that are far more difficult, far more hostile, far more problematic for the UK. than the Article 50 negotiations have been. If you go down the path that if the withdrawal agreement is accepted, then you move into a second phase where you negotiate a trade agreement, and everybody recognises, at least that know something about trade, that this will be deeply problematic. It'll take a lot of time. The average duration of these negotiations between the EU and a third country is 4 years. It'll take at least 4 years for this an agreement to be negotiated. And the clock says 10 months.
Not only the clock says only 10 months, but also there's the issue of ratification, which actually is very, very lengthy. And more importantly, the UK and the EU have to reach an agreement about whether they have to extend the transition period by the end of June. Is it the end of June? So there will be a new government by Christmas. We don't know when there will be a new commission. We're not quite sure when they will have this negotiating mandate. So effectively, the decision about transition has to be taken within 3-4 months of negotiations. So this is, even if you are the most enthusiastic and benevolent and optimist person, this is an awfully short period of time.
But this is why my hunch is that politically some of the Brexiters in the Conservative Party think that at that point they can get what they want in terms of as close to no deal as possible, either at that transition point or further down, and that's their gamble. They've backed this because they think that at a later point they can break it.
I think that's certainly what members of the ERG were claiming when Boris Johnson came back with the deal. I think that with that you have to question what no deal would look like. It's unclear to me that any Prime Minister, any political leader would really want to own no deal. It will be deeply problematic. I'm old enough and sort of bourgeois enough to have somebody who comes and cleans my oven every year. Okay, and my partner made what I would argue is a mistake in asking him if he was a bit worried about Brexit, and he said, "Well, no, because even if there's no deal, it'll just be 2 days of disruption." And my Polish suppliers of the chemicals for sort of cleaning your oven have told me that there'll be a couple, 2% tariffs at most. That's just not how it will be.
What will the tariff be?
The tariff will be a lot higher than that. And actually, as a good teacher, what I would say is you can go to the DEXU website and scroll your way down the list of tariffs because they are there.
Yeah.
And most of them are pretty alarming.
I think
and these aren't just the tariffs.
In the interest of balance, I have to ask you, Hussein, why are you talking British oven cleaning down?
So we've established "Get Brexit Done" is clearly just a slogan. It's a very snappy slogan, but actually it's a lot more complicated than that. Now, Labour's policy is actually to renegotiate the withdrawal agreement again for a third time, and this is what Jeremy Corbyn had to say at his campaign launch.
After 3 long years of Brexit division and failure from the Tories, we have to get this issue sorted out. We need to take it out of the hands of politicians and trust the people to have the final say. Labour will get Brexit sorted within 6 months. We'll let the people decide whether to leave on sensible deal or remain. It really isn't that complicated.
It really isn't that complicated. Is he right, or is he also pie in the sky?
Well, a pie in the sky is maybe a bit too ungenerous, but certainly difficult. First of all, we've got to take into account the sort of wariness of the EU27, the EU institutions, at the length of time this has taken the UK to come forward with a position. Also, they've already opened the withdrawal agreement negotiations once. Will they do so a second time? Only if it's in their interest to do so. And I think that they might be quite happy to see some of the regulatory alignment restored. Certainly, the Labour Party, members of the Labour Party, would like to see environmental protection restored and alignment on sort of workers' rights. So those are things that you could see there might be sort of movement or desirability on both sides about. But I don't think one should underestimate the wariness over the other side of the channel about all of this now. The EU really regrets the UK's decision, regretted the referendum from the moment it happened, the moment the results were known. But its interest now is in getting an orderly Brexit. It wants something that's sort of predictable, and it doesn't necessarily want Singapore on Thames, which is, I think, it's sort of big concern.
What do we mean by Singapore on Thames?
Well, some people argue that what's motivating certainly a large number of Brexiteers on the Tory backbenchers is a desire for a sort of deregulated economy that would compete with the EU on standards. And of course, this would be destabilising and undesirable destabilising for the EU, undesirable therefore for it, because having such an economy on your doorstep would be difficult and some might argue dangerous.
I think we have to appreciate that, although Brexit is a political issue, it is fought on legal terms. And one has to remind himself or herself that actually the current negotiations is only about the terms of the withdrawal agreement. The EU cannot negotiate at the moment with the UK its future relationship. So, in a way, what Mr. Corbyn is suggesting cannot strictly legally speaking, happen. The UK can only settle Brexit, can only settle its future relationship once it finds itself outside the EU. What can happen, of course, within 6 months or even less, is what we call an amendment to the political declaration, which actually designs or describes more accurately the main lines of the future relationship. But I don't think that it's realistic to suggest that in 6 months' time the two sides are going to successfully negotiate the future relationship. This cannot happen.
And in terms of a second referendum, presumably that would have to go through Parliament, and then presumably that would take quite a lot of time.
Yes, I remember what the time is expected. Yeah, there would have to be a referendum bill,
and
there would have to be therefore some agreement on what the referendum question is, and there might be arguments about whether or not there should be some preparation for that referendum that wasn't done in the first referendum, so that could all take quite a long time.
And the franchise is a really key and crucial issue,
right?
It needs to be very strongly politicised.
Yes.
So should it be 16 and 17-year-olds as well? Is that what we're...
That's what part of the debate is. Yes.
Yeah.
But presumably...
But also other citizens, citizens of other countries and UK citizens living abroad and whether they should be...
All those issues who didn't get the vote the first time around. Presumably, I suppose at one level, when Corbyn says it's not complicated, I think what he's doing is refuting the idea that the policy itself is complicated to state. At one level, it isn't. It is quite clear. We'll renegotiate and then we'll put that as this deal or out. That's quite clear. The complication, as you were saying, is actually whether they could get that agreement done in so short a time. And presumably their thinking is that it would be more straightforward because they would be, as it were, softening the agreement they're trying to make. It would be more moving towards the EU's direction. Is that what you think?
That would make it perhaps more desirable than the current. Current. But the thing that has to be factored in and trade off against consideration is you're getting this done because it's also in the EU's interest to get it done and to move on. But I think there's a sort of a larger point which Corbyn's interventions prompts, which is that none of the complexity of this have been really brought home, and this is one of the failures of media scrutiny in this whole over the past 3 years, and one could argue longer when it comes to Europe, which is a failure to recognise the intrinsic complexity of this, and it's particularly after the referendum not to identify what the sort of the technical issues were. Nikos has spoken about the legal issues, which are indeed important, but which, in some ways, the politicians have decided it's not in their interest to broadcast to a general public. They have presented this as a simple issue. The last thing it is a simple issue.
I think that's important, but I think that's also it wasn't in their interest to do so because what's been missing from the debate has in a way been not just the technicalities of the process, but actually the propositions that the different parties hold for what the country would or could look like in a post-Brexit context. And none of them really want to say what that is. And I find that slightly odd because it does seem to me that behind all this, and you can see it coming out more clearly in the election campaign, there's actually some very, very radically different proposals as to what the UK economy should look like and would be like. Yeah. The Singapore on Thames model, as you put it, on the one hand from the Conservative Party, and a more tax-based state interventionist proposal coming from Labour. So actually, on the one hand, there is a wider and kind of more interesting ideological divergence between the parties than we've seen for a long time, yet that's being hidden by the Brexit debate.
If we want to put things into context, we have to think about the following. The withdrawal agreement, as we said, is mainly about how the UK is going to divorce with the EU. And the main subjects were the divorce bill, the citizens' rights, and the situation in the Irish border. out of those 3 issues, 2 of them were actually solved within like 4 or 5 months. And we got stuck just because of one issue. The future trade negotiations would actually entail discussion about each and every aspect of the economic life. And not just here in the UK, also across the channel. So this idea that was the difficult part, i.e. the withdrawal agreement negotiations, it's totally doesn't represent correctly what will happen in the future, which is there has to be a very significant discussion about what you said, Alan. How this country wants to be in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but yeah, it's not just the vision that politicians elaborate about what kind of society economy that they want. It's also how that can be fitted with the sort of reality of the negotiations they're about to undertake. I mean, when you start thinking about this sector by sector, the scale, the magnitude of the difficulties are really enormous. I mean, the sector I know best is aviation. And that's a sector which requires will require a tremendous amount of sort of delicate, intricate negotiations. Nicholas is also right about something else as well, which is that the withdrawal agreement is one thing, but the EU 27 have been really united over what they want, what's in the best for the European Union. With the trade negotiation, that's not at all the case. The EU 27 have vastly different relationships. For some countries, the UK is the most important commercial destination. For others, there's just a security arrangement, and those will differences will have to be worked out before they come to the table. That will make things very.
I have to ask you about the Liberal Democrats, because they are the only party, as far as I can tell, who are saying that if they win, they will revoke Article 50 and put a stop to the whole process. So, I mean, clearly them winning an overall majority is pretty unlikely, but can it be done, theoretically?
Well, legally possible, but politically impossible, I would say.
Yes, legally, that's quite straightforward. They just pass a bill and they pass it. What's not clear to me is if that were to happen, what would be the fallout of that if they were to do that? Because you would presumably still have some significant proportion of the population strongly wedded to leave and angry about things being revoked without any consideration they might see it. Obviously, a general election would trump the referendum, but you've still got a political problem about that percentage of the population that would be that would be in favour of leave. So the division in the country, in that sense, would be intensified, it would seem to me, and I don't know how that would then play out in subsequent elections.
So, but are they doing this as a sort of a negotiating position for a future coalition government, saying, well, actually, anything that brings us closer to cancelling Brexit is something that we might be able to sign up to?
Well, no, I don't want to sound cynical, but they're doing it for electoral reasons. That's their main pitch to voters. The Liberal Democrats' goal is to increase their number of members in Parliament. That's their primary goal, way ahead of revoke. They see an opportunity to weaken Labour and increase their representation, and that's something they've always wanted to do. They see an opportunity to take some votes from the Conservatives, because the Conservative Party becomes more full of more radical, not just on Brexit, but more radical Conservatives. They think they can take votes from there, and I think they do. I don't think they believe they can win this election, but I think they believe they can increase their representation to a significant degree, which saves them from the hole they were in after the coalition and gives them a base from which to then develop. So I don't think I'm being really too cynical to say that primarily in their minds is not, in a way, is not even the 2019 election or revoke, but is the election after that. They want to put themselves in a big position to win that. And I say that that's what a party is for. So that's not me kind of having a go at them. That is obviously what they would do, right?
That's how they work. Okay. So I do want to hear from the voters. I went out last Thursday to speak to the voters in the city of Norwich, and I asked them if they had a clear idea in their head about who they were going to vote for.
I know what my views are on Brexit, but on the election, I can't decide, to be perfectly honest. I don't think either of the main parties have got themselves sorted out, and a third party in the running has made it absolutely clear they're going to ignore what's been voted for so far. So I don't think you should probably just ignore the previous vote like that.
How are you feeling about the whole election business at the moment?
Yeah, I'm glad we're having one. Yeah, very glad we're having one. But I won't be voting for Boris, because there's so many things that I disagree with what he's been doing and what's going to happen. But equally, I'm not so keen on Jeremy Corbyn, so I'm hoping that he's actually going to step down at some point and someone else is going to take over the Labour Party if he gets in.
Politicians cannot be honest, because being honest will cost them their career. Mr Corbyn, are you in or out? Tell us.
If I'm going to vote, it most likely be Labour, just because environment. I've seen more stuff like Labour talking about environmental stuff than like Conservatives.
I think because Brexit isn't the main thing, you're talking the next 5 years, and obviously Brexit could last the next 5 years if we keep going the way that we're going, but yeah, it's just really hard because that is the main topic, but it's also not the only topic, so I have no idea who I'm going to vote for.
So a lot of confusion, and not surprisingly, people don't know who to vote for. Can we offer them any guidance, any advice, any help at all, or does it just come down to gut feeling and what you want to happen next?
Well, I think your vox pops quite nicely illustrate the complexity and peculiarity of the election, at least as it is at the moment. So in a way, what election campaigns are about is trying to convince people not of who to vote for, but what the issue is that they're actually voting on. And usually in British politics, that issue is something like change or no change. Sometimes it's this leader or that leader. There are times where it becomes about a very specific thing, more money for this war or less, maybe Brexit. But what's going on is that actually the election is, obviously for some people it's about Brexit, but that doesn't quite neatly divide through the parties. Other people, as you had someone there saying it's about the leader. You had someone else saying it was about what the situation could be in 5 years' time. There'll be other people who will say the election is about climate and the climate emergency. So at the moment we're in this position where there's an attempt, parties and others will try and make the election about one particular thing. I think the Tories will try and make it about Brexit, get Brexit done. Labour will try and make it about economic and social issues, and it won't get resolved. I think that's my prediction, that this election will not settle down into a clear question and in a clear division over which people can decide, which will mean there will be confusion. That may affect turnout, but ultimately that makes the whole thing extremely unpredictable. And I think in a sense you could say, really geographically as well as culturally, there's about 7 different elections going on all at once over 7 different questions.
Yeah, really, really interesting.
No, I think Alan, I agree with everything Alan said. I mean, I would just say that you may choose as a voter to decide that that Brexit, doesn't matter, isn't the most relevant issue. But the problem with that is that Brexit is going to be an issue for at least another decade, and it's just hard to see how or if it will be resolved. But certainly the election will have an impact on the choices that are made. It might not be a decisive impact, but it will be an impact nonetheless.
Okay, can I ask some what if questions? So what if Johnson gets his majority? We leave on the 31st of January, probably?
That seems to be the most likely sort of possibility, partly because so many moderate Conservatives have left the party or won't be standing again. So that seems it seems likely that will take place. Although we've got to remember that after the withdrawal bill comes a transition period. So we're not leaving as such. Well, we're leaving in some sense of the term on the 31st of January, but not until the end of 2020.
So just explain the transition period and then what happens at the end.
So the moment that the UK leaves, for a period up to 31st of December 2020, EU law will continue applying in the same way. So there will be absolutely no notable difference, with the exception of the fact that actually the UK will not be present in the political institutions. So they will not be represented in the European Council, the Council, and so on and so forth. So during this period, there will be no difference, and how long this period will last, it very much depends on a decision that the UK and the EU have to take by the end of June of 2020. And if they agree, they can actually extend this transition period for up to 1 more year or 2 years. But if they're going to do that, the UK would have to actually cough up large amounts of money, because after 2020 we move to the next financial circle of the EU, where all the big member states would have to actually contribute to the budget. So it will be a very, very difficult discussion.
So that possibly means there is going to be a whole new kind of round of fights in Parliament towards the end. If Johnson wins the majority, there's going to be a lot of arguments towards the end of that Parliament, and so it's going to make a difference how big that majority is and how well able he is to therefore to control the Parliament. And as a small thing, I'd also say, excuse me, it depends on who gets elected, because one of the things that is happening in this election is an awful lot of MPs are standing down.
Yeah.
So there's going to be an awful lot of very new MPs, which means they're inexperienced.
Yeah.
But that can mean all kinds of things. That can mean they do what leader says. That can also mean they don't do what leaders say. They're unknown quantities, and a lot of the new Conservative intake look to me. This is not a scientific claim, but from what I can see, they tend to be more on the hard Brexit side.
Yeah. Two points on that, if I may. The first point is that during the discussion in the Parliament about the EU withdrawal agreement bill, the government had accepted the possibility of introducing a new amendment with which the Parliament would have a say over how long the transition period will be. Of course, the withdrawal agreement bill was never passed, got the royal assent. So we don't know what will happen after the elections. And a second point about the composition of the new Parliament. I think this is absolutely crucial because, I mean, at the moment as we speak, there is almost there's a tacit admission that actually somehow the Tories are going to win an overall majority. I just want to point out that, during the weekend we had elections in Spain. The Prime Minister of Spain took the same risk as Boris Johnson. He thought that he's going to take an overall majority, and he didn't. In fact, he lost seats. So what will be the composition of the next parliament it will be absolutely crucial as to how the next phase of the negotiations will actually materialize.
Okay, can I just clarify one thing? So I've heard said that actually if we leave on the 31st of January, then we have to negotiate a trade arrangement, and then but actually we might end up leaving in a way that is a bit like no deal anyway. Is that right?
Yes, I mean that is possible if the withdrawal agreement is ratified, is approved, and then no trade agreement is negotiated to determine the sort of future relationship between the UK and the EU before December 2020. That's the case. There's something else to say. I think Nicholas is absolutely right about the indeterminacy of all of this. I mean, I don't think that many people expected there to be a hung parliament in 2017 either. No. I think that's right. There is another political decision that the UK government needs to take, which is it needs to decide whether it is going to nominate a commissioner or not, because it hasn't done so as yet. And also, the Johnson government decided that the UK wouldn't be represented in the council. Right. In council working groups. So currently, although the UK is still a member, and it will be a member until the 31st of January 2020 at the earliest, it isn't effectively represented, it isn't participating as a member state normally does in the institutions of the EU.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up soon, but I do want to ask, if we get another hung parliament, what happens then? I mean, really, where do we stand if we get another? Because that is a real possibility, right? The country's so divided.
It is. It's a strong possibility.
What happens if we get another hung parliament?
Well, it depends who's the largest party.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it could be that the numbers fall out so that some kind of workable coalition or supply arrangement is possible, leading to some kind of functioning agreement and a short parliament that does something about Brexit. That could happen. Who's supporting whom, I couldn't say. Or it could mean that there is an inability to establish agreement. And I think I would say, and I think this is a political science point rather than ideological one, is that actually what's going on here in the sense is that politics ultimately does need different interests to be brought together and brokered in some kind of way. And in that sense, compromise is the art of politics. It doesn't mean selling out your principles. It just means recognising that if you want to get things done, ultimately you have to build larger coalitions rather than try and establish narrower ones. And part of the problem is we haven't got that. So I suppose I say that in part because if there were a hung parliament, what would seem to me the rational thing to occur, which doesn't mean it would occur, is that there is actually some attempt to build a broader consensus across perhaps a number of parties within that parliament in order to focus on reaching some agreement.
Any last thoughts?
Yes, and this is something that the UK is not very good at because it has a majoritarian winner-takes-all culture, and a lot of the responses, a lot of the sort of head-shaking on the part of our current partners is that they cannot believe that after a referendum there wasn't not necessarily a national government, but at least some kind of national negotiation about what position we would adopt and what on what terms we would leave and what the future relationship would look like. And there hasn't been any kind of discourse of that sort, except for the latter days of the May administration. So that's really important. And of course, one of the questions that's bound to be raised is whether there should be another referendum. And of course, one of the problems with that is we don't know how close it would be, and if it would be if it's close, yes, then would that actually resolve anything? And given that a lot of the problems that we're sort of currently confronting come from a sort of binary choice in referendum, it doesn't seem to me that
it doesn't address that.
That's the way of resolving issues.
And part of what I'm trying to get at, I think, is the way in which we tend to talk a lot about politics now, and even politicians do, as if it really is all matters of sort of just taste or preference or culture. I like Europe, I don't like Europe, but we ignore that it is actually about Brexit and other issues are really. Some people benefit and some people lose. There are some people who don't benefit so much from the EU. There are people who will suffer from Brexit. And there seems to be an unwillingness to recognise that there are real interests that are harmed by either option, and the only way to deal with that is to try and think about how you can broker some kind of relationship between those interests. And nobody wants to do that, which is why nobody wants to give.
But then the $6 million question is how we get to that position, because we just don't have the politicians or the political system which enable that.
No, we don't. And that's where yes.
Now, as my last point, I want to go back to something that Alan said when he said that actually here in the UK there are at the moment around 7 elections. And I think this is absolutely true and something that is forgotten often when one is in England or even more when one is in London. I mean, there are parts of the UK like Northern Ireland where none of the main national parties run. While in Scotland there's a dominant force in the form of the SNP, and one has to appreciate what happened in 2017, where there was a hung parliament and the UP became a dominant force in UK politics, and the UK politics discovered the opinions of the UP before they were largely ignorant about. So if there is a hung parliament, we might end up again with some kind of coalition where there will be a party with a strong regional force behind it, and this might also dictate not only the politics of Brexit, but also the constitutional politics of the UK for the years to come.
So
Okay.
I think I can I sum it up there?
Go on then.
I realise what the issue is in the election. Strong and stable is not an option, it's just which flavour of chaos you want.
We've been saying that for a long time anyway. All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Thank you to our guests, Hussein Kassim and Nick Skouteris. Thank you to the BBC, Sky, Reuters, ITV and Channel 4 for our news clips. There's more political analysis on our website, which is ueapolitics.org. And if you are in Norwich on the 23rd of November or the 3rd of December, we have 2 free events where you can ask the experts your questions about Brexit. No politicians are saying that's right.
Exactly.
Guaranteed. No politicians at these events. Ask the experts. If you want to book a free ticket, they're free events. bit.ly/UEA Hum events. UEA Hum events for humanities. And we'll be back soon with another podcast, More Politics at the Edge. Thank you for listening.